Hello there, I'm Blake Sanders, SGCI Web Curator. I'm joined here today by Andrew Polk for the first installment of The Next Chapter, a regular feature in the newly reimagined graphic impressions. I'm going to give just a real brief introduction to Andrew, a sort of shockingly brief intro with the expectation that we're going to cover a lot of bases once we get moving. Andrew Polk is now an Indiana-based artist who got his BFA in painting and print from Memphis State University and his MFA in 1977 from Indiana University. Spent 40 years teaching printmaking, including 32 years at Arizona University in Tucson, where he also founded Elvis Press. His work has been featured in innumerable solo and international or invitational exhibitions nationally and internationally. And he continues to teach lithography and printmaking workshops around the country. As I said, he and his wife, Catherine Polk, have now relocated Elvis Press from Tucson to rural Indiana, a sort of reversal of the expectation for retirees. So welcome, Andy.
Hey, good to see you, Blake.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, hey, let me just make a minor correction. It's the University of Arizona.
I'm sorry.
Arizona University.
I'm sorry. I should mention at the beginning as well. I first met Andy in 2011 at SGC in the SGCI conference in St. Louis, where my wife Hannah and I got married as an officially sponsored conference event. I put on an exhibition featuring printmaking partnerships, and I had never met Catherine or Andy, but I was familiar and really loved their work, and I cold called them and they agreed to participate, and then they were a great addition to the panel that we had at that same conference. So y'all have always been sort of our relationship goals. So it's nice to have you now that we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary and we're doing a sort of revamp of that Blessed Unions exhibition right now. And it's a particular honor that you're our first interview for this feature. So thanks for being with me.
Congratulations on 10 years.
Thanks so much. We've got a long way to go to catch up with you.
Yeah.
So let's start with teaching, I suppose. You taught for 40 years, as I said, 32 at Arizona. Can you talk a bit about how university teaching changed over that time and how you evolved with the times?
Well, I was thinking, you gave me these questions in advance, and I was thinking about that, and I came up with all kinds of answers. But you know what? The truth of the matter is, I don't think that much about teaching because I'm far removed from it.
Yeah.
I don't miss it. But I loved it. I loved teaching, don't get me wrong. And I felt fortunate to have the job. It was fantastic. I had some incredible students. I also had some really great colleagues. All of that was really great. But after 40 years, I got to the point where I wanted to move on. I wanted to go to the next phase, whatever that was. And I didn't really know what that was. But how has teaching changed? Well, it was looser in the 70s. We didn't have something called a syllabus. Very few people did a lot of pre-planning. It just kind of winged it. And it was fun, it was cool, and I think we did a pretty good job. But by the time I left teaching, it was much different. We write, the syllabi would be maybe 5 or 6 pages, list every single assignment, list your absentee policy. Now that always killed me. You had to say, if you don't come to class, I have the right to fail you.
Right.
But we had to say that. And the same thing, if you didn't do the projects, we have the right to fail you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that's changed. So it was looser and then it got tighter.
Sure.
And I didn't mind that. I thought it was cool, but that's the main difference.
Yeah. Just coming out of the COVID semesters, I think my last bunch of syllabi were more like 12 to 15 pages because we had to include so many new policies that came along with the pandemic. And you got to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted so that you're above reproach.
I retired right before COVID. I mean,
Right.
a couple of years before COVID.
Yeah.
And I looked at what's going on in any education, but in particular higher education and printmaking classes. And I don't know how you did it. I don't know how anyone taught lithography during COVID. It must have been such a challenge, but
Yeah.
anyway, I missed that. I retired at a good time.
Yeah. No, this is exactly what I was hoping you were going to say in a way. It's great to hear about, a long laundry list of all the ways that things changed over the years, but I also like to hear that, you made a decision, you're happy with your choice, and you're enjoying your retirement. That's exactly what I want this conversation to be about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's been great. It's just wonderful. So glad I did it.
Along similar lines, also looking backwards, I saw that you had a nearly 30-year relationship with the Davis Dominguez Gallery. How did that relationship motivate your practice? And now that presumably that's also sort of moved to the side, is there something now that takes the place of that regular appointment?
Davis Dominguez was a fantastic gallery. They closed at the same time that I retired. The two weren't related at all, but
Sure.
but it did mean that relationship with that gallery stopped at the same time that I retired. Over the course of the years, I had several galleries, Chicago, LA, Scottsdale, and a few other places. But the one at Davis Dominguez was the one that lasted the longest. And they were the greatest gallery for me. They were so supportive. If you're familiar with my career, or anyone that's familiar with my career, you know that I've been through a lot of style changes. I've had my ups and downs.
Right.
And they stuck by me all the time. There were times when you couldn't get people to take the work, and then there were times where it sold real well, and they just always were very supportive, and I'll always be grateful for them. That was Mike Dominguez and Candy Davis, and I just love those two people. They're fantastic.
Do you have any advice for young artists that are looking for a gallery? What they should be looking for, the sort of arrangement that you think best serves printmakers in particular, and what they should come to expect from their gallerists?
Well, I guess the best advice I can give is be known. Get yourself out. Get people to know who you are. I can't tell you how many galleries I approached cold and just walked into the door and said, "Hey, I'm Andy Polk. I'm an artist and I got some work. Would you show it?" And went nowhere. It went absolutely nowhere.
Sure.
The thing that works is when someone opens the door for you, when someone introduces you. One of the artists in their stable might say, "Oh, I know an artist is named Blake Sanders and he'd be just fantastic at this gallery. I think he'd be perfect." And so then the gallery contacts you, and that's the best thing. There were a couple of times the gallery that I had in Scottsdale saw an ad that I had in Art in America with another gallery, a gallery in Chicago. So they approached me, and that happened. So the advice I have is be known. How do you be known? Well, Instagram's a good way to do it. Facebook's a good way to do it. Sure. Going to conferences and just networking, getting to know people. All of that matters. You can ask friends to recommend you to a gallery, but I don't really recommend that.
Sure.
If they think you're right, you don't need to ask them. If they might get approached, say, "Hey, I'm looking for an artist that fits such and such a bill." If you come to mind, they'll recommend you. If not, they won't. But if you ask them to recommend you, then they're kind of, you put them on a spot. So if it's a good friend and it comes up in a conversation and it's maybe okay, but otherwise, just let things happen naturally. And the best thing you can do is just be known.
Mm-hmm. Well, I
Have
think
a presence.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about the possibilities of social media, but I'm glad you talked about going to conferences and getting yourself out physically too, because I feel like that's as Hannah and I continue to teach, that's getting a little more difficult to convince students to do. You know, in particular with conferences and things, they can be expensive and that can be cost prohibitive. But just getting students to show up for visiting artist lectures and things is getting difficult. And I think that's a really, if people can make the time, it made a huge difference in the launch of my career as well. And I think it's really important to remind folks of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Website. It's been a great resource for us over the years, as an example of, again, sort of making yourself known, right? And in particular on that website, there's this amazing sort of Rolodex of artist statements in all sorts of styles and formats that were a really good resource to show students as well. So again, now that you're in a sort of different stage in your career, does writing about your work within those sort of parameters of the artist statement continue to provide insight into your content and practice, or do you have any advice for others as they reflect and share about their own work via statements?
Yeah, well, everyone's different. Everyone has a different way of doing it. My philosophy when I write is to write something I care about. I don't sit down and try to write. It's like all of a sudden something comes to me, an idea, and I just need to write it down. And sometimes it's serious. Sometimes it's silly. Sometimes it might be spiritual. Sometimes it might be angry. But I do write a lot. I continue to write a lot. Lately, I've been invited in a couple of projects like portfolio projects or exhibitions where I was asked to write a statement about the work, and especially some portfolio projects. There was a recent, Melanie Yazzie put together a portfolio, Kamala Harris, and she invited me along with a lot of other people, and I was flattered to be invited, and I agreed. And I didn't want to do a portrait of her, and my recent work is very much based in nature. So I was thinking, what could I do? And all of this is a roundabout way of talking about a statement. Sorry, you might want to edit a lot of this out. But so anyway, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll deal with the idea of the shattered glass ceiling. I'll put a mirror on the ground pointing up at the sky through the trees. I'll break it and photograph that. Well, I hit it with a sledgehammer and the mirror went everywhere. And so that didn't work at all. I mean, I tried to put it back together and I took some photographs and they were really crappy and they were no good. But that idea of the fractured ceiling through the trees really interested me, and so I took a picture of a beech tree out here, looking up, and it occurred to me that the way the branches went all over the place, there are lots of branches and everything. That in itself really splintered the sky, fractured the sky. So I ended up writing, I guess you would call it a poem. Gee, I don't have it with me here, but it refers to the fact that her roots are from different places, and she's shattered the ceiling, and the shards are falling down, and gee, right, I can't remember the exact wording, and what comes to me sounds so stupid I don't really want to say it. But anyway, if you remind me, I'll send you that poem, and if you want to publish it or something, you can. But anyway, that was a piece that I wrote for, and I really enjoyed writing that piece because I like the image a lot, but a person would look at it and never know it had anything to do with our vice president.
Sure.
and yet it was very much inspired by her, and I thought it was important. So so anyway, I do write about the work. Sometimes I write about the work about an individual piece, and sometimes write about work in general. And I enjoy. I guess what I would say about writing and in the way of advice is write about what you care about. Write something that you think someone gives a damn about. Too many statements are just damn boring. You don't want to bore somebody. You want to interest them. You want to engage them. You might want to make them mad. You might want to make them laugh, but you want to engage them. You want them to read it. One of my first shows that I had was a show in Scottsdale at what's now the Scottsdale Museum of Art. But at the time it was Scottsdale Center for the Arts. And and for that show, I wrote a poem about my father's death. And it was this kind of cathartic, silly. I mean, it was humorous and tragic at the same time. And that was a breakthrough for me. It was like, oh my God, that really spoke to what my work is about. And yet it didn't say anything about the work. So that was like an epiphany. And so ever since then, I tended to write statements that are less didactic and less direct, uh, and sometimes poetic, but I probably said all I need to say.
That's great. Tell us about your move to Indiana. Where exactly are you now?
We're outside of Bloomington, Indiana. So we're still near a college town. That's about a 20-minute ride from here.
Uh-huh.
We're in the woods, but our PO box is at Salisbury, Indiana. So so if you were to mail us a letter, you would send it to Salisbury, Indiana. And so it's rural Indiana, South Central Indiana, and it's this beautiful wooded area. You can see behind me, this is my backyard, I guess you'd call it. And it's, you know, it's full of wildlife, it's quiet. In Tucson, we live near a naval base, and and planes were always flying over. We don't have any of that. The noises we have are owls and crickets, cicadas, and bullfrogs, and all kinds of birds. It's really great. So what prompted the move? I didn't actually want to move. I wanted to stay in Tucson, where I had all my connections, and I real involved with the community. A lot of people knew me. I knew a lot of people, and I had a connection to the university as an emeritus professor. But Catherine outvoted me, really, and it's because our children live. My daughter and her children live here, live in Bloomington, and my son, he now lives in Indianapolis, but he lived in Chicago at the time that we moved. So she just wanted to be near our children and grandchildren. And I kind of reluctantly made the move. But once I got here, it's like, oh, thank goodness. This is such an amazing place. It's best decision we ever made to move here. And it's been such an inspiration to my work. It's great.
That's wonderful. How did you find the particular the home you're in now? And you sent some pictures of your studio. Was that building there when you purchased the property, or did that come in the first couple years?
Well, we found the home while we were in Tucson on on the web, and so it was the first place we looked at when we got here. And although we looked at some other places, it was the one we knew we wanted. The studio was a 2-car garage, a separate building, and we hired a contractor, and he put a ceiling in. So now we have an attic up there where I still work, and he drywalled it and put lights in, and so it's really great. So we did a lot of work to convert that building into a studio, and we changed the garage doors into these nice double doors with glass, so we got great light. It's great. No running water. That's the thing that Catherine and I kind of squabble about. I filled up a 30-gallon tank of water, and So I turn on the spigot and fill my buckets up for sponging water. She thinks that's not right. And,
Yeah.
when we grain, I go out in the driveway, which can be a drag when it's, below zero.
Right.
But it works for me.
Yeah. So what was it like moving a lithography studio most of the way across the country? What was the process of like? You talked a little about revamping that garage space, but what was it like establishing the new studio and figuring out like the chemistry, for example, in Tucson versus Indiana?
Well, it's easier to print here because it's not so dry.
Right.
And the winters, I had no idea how nice it is to print in cold weather. I usually print at under 60 degrees in the winter, and it is just so wonderful. You work up a sweat because you're moving around, and so you're not cold, but oh, it's so great. And the humidity helps too. So the only downside about printing here is in the summer, it's so humid that the gum doesn't dry.
Mm-hmm.
When you gum out your margins,
Yeah.
it's it's sticky. You put your hand down on it, and then you got gum on your hand. It's like, so I would put masking tape over the gum. That's a pain. But we did get a dehumidifier and an air conditioner.
Hmm.
We don't really use the air conditioner except maybe 2 or 3 weeks in the summer. Like we
Yeah.
haven't used it this summer yet. It's still really cool. But that takes the humidity out of the air. But that's one of the downsides about Indiana is that it's too humid at times.
Yeah. So you talked about you talked about having your 30-gallon barrel of water and still hauling things like that. Have you made any changes yet to the studio to uh, make accommodations as you inevitably age? You in your materials that you sent, and I'm definitely going to post this in the print version. You included a video of you buffing a stone, and you're still getting some serious RPM. So you're still doing all right for yourself. But that's probably eventually it's your years are going to catch up with you. So have you thought about how to keep making, especially stone lithos, as you get older?
Well, we haven't done a whole lot yet. I'm working a little smaller. I haven't done a full sheet litho in a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 18 by 24 is about as big as I'm getting because we got some great 20 by 26 stones that are pretty easy to move around, a lot easier than our, 24 by 36 stones.
Sure.
I intend to do some large ones again, and Captain was just talking about starting on one. But for now, I'm mostly working smaller. We've got a hydraulic lift. We had that though. We've had that even before I got old. Am
Sure.
I old? I guess I am, huh?
I mean, you're older than I am. You're a retiree. You're going to get old eventually. So,
Yeah, I'm 70. I guess that's
yeah,
old. I remember when I thought 70 was real old.
right. Yeah,
And it feels kind of old now, but it doesn't feel as old as it used to seem.
that's that's the
I
best you
remember
can hope
when
for.
30 seemed old.
Right.
I
Yeah.
remember looking at 30-year-olds and thinking, I'll never live that long.
Yeah.
Those days are gone.
Yeah. Let's start talking about the work a little bit more specifically. So you've maintained a print career for over 50 years. Looking back, are there themes or through lines that have endured or continued to come up through the years? And how have the years matured content or softened or solidified attitudes, things like that?
It's hard for me to say right now. I mean, a lot of times I can look back and or I'm doing something at the moment and I think, oh, that relates back to what I did back way back then. So let me just kind of briefly kind of go through my career, and that is, I mean, well, starting in 1972 when I was a graduate student. up to the present, I've gone through a number of different styles, and some of them have been like I went through an op art stage, and then I went through a kind of a sort of a grotesque figurative stage that was grotesque slash cartoony,
Mhm.
inspired somewhat by Harry Hu and that kind of ilk,
Yeah. Yeah.
or Peter Saul or that kind of thing.
Right.
And then I that got more and more geometric and less uh, uh, volumetric, and more kind of flat and that kind of thing. And then I switched over to a non-representational style, and then I started working with language and started writing on the canvas. And then I developed a kind of my own language. I started writing stories in a language that no one could read, and then uh, I think I've left out a couple of styles. And then I got to where I am now, which is really sort of working in a very referential way, inspired by my environment. And so as I think about how does that all relate together, well, almost all of my work has had a story behind it. There are some exceptions, but most of the works actually have a story or something about them. Like an abstract painting might have been about Beirut or some battle,
Mhm.
um, or the Gulf War, something like that. My grotesque slash cartoon humorous imagery was about domestic violence a lot, but it also got into love-hate relationships and things like that. My
Mhm.
work now deals a lot with, in a more poetic way, with the cycle of life, birth and death and life and rebirth and that cycle. Um, so back to, if there's a theme, there's always been a kind of story to the work.
Mhm.
Another thing about the work that has always been manifest, and that's craft. And I didn't really put my finger on this for a long time, but I've always taken pride in doing something well. One
Mhm.
of the things I've always wanted people to do is look at that work, look at my work and go, wow, that's well done, which is kind of a dumb thing. And, for years, I kind of poo-pooed craft. But these days, I really care about the craft of the work, that it's really well made. And I look back, even when I was throwing paint, I was very careful to do it in a way that was very controlled, very
Mhm.
thought out and pre-planned and very well crafted.
Mhm.
Uh, it, Not like Jackson Pollock or Vincent Van Gogh, who didn't think a lot about craftsmanship. So that's another thing: storytelling, craft. And then there's another side of me. Oh, one of the phases that I left out. I've always had a fascination with mathematics, um, and engineering, but I did a lot of computer generated art where I'd write the programs that would make the work. So I did a series of works that the real art was writing the program, and then I just sort of put in some numbers for some different parameters and push return, and it generates an artwork, and then I would print those out, and it was really great. I used this program to produce several hundred pieces of work,
Wow.
and they weren't all good, but you could go through and pick out maybe 20% of them that were pretty damn good. And so I like that systems. So there's the math, there's the computer, but even with the abstract work, when I was throwing work, they were throwing paint and throwing things. Um, it was very systems oriented. I would set up a kind of a system that would the system was almost more important than the outcome. So very inspired by John Cage. Always thought that was just amazing, the kinds of doors he opened, not only
Mhm.
with his art, but with his music and with his poetry.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah, I was curious if, along that idea of systems, you sent that video of the uh, the piano and things, and if that was related in some way to that.
Yeah, well, these days after retiring, I decided to pick up the piano. So I play the piano every day,
Wow.
and I enjoy it. I love it. I'm not very good. I'm taking lessons, and I work real hard, and I try to get better.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy it. I enjoy improvising, and I enjoy learning things that are difficult for me,
Mhm.
increasing my skills. Uh, so I play the piano. I also make music on the computer. So I've got a lot of software
Uh-huh.
that I can program and generate stuff. And sometimes I put the piano with the computer work. And so anyway, that's another side of me. But it's hard to separate all of that.
Sure, absolutely. It's, it sounds like you're a good piano student. Maybe there's something to be said for picking it up later in life rather than being forced to do it as a little kid.
I'm a good student in the sense that I practice all the time. I'm a lousy student in the sense that old guys don't learn new tricks very well. They
Sure.
I don't have a whole lot of facility. It's hard for my hands to do stuff.
Yeah. Talked a little bit about your recent work having to do with themes about aging and mortality. Um, could you talk a little bit more about that and what your motivations, goals are for your current work?
Yeah, a couple of years before I retired, I got sick. I went to the emergency room. They did a CT scan. They said, "Oh, you got pancreatic cancer. Congratulations." No, they didn't really say that,
Right.
uh, but they said you got pancreatic cancer, and it's not a death sentence for everybody, but it's a
That's a
death
bad one.
sentence for most people.
Yeah.
And that was really, really, I think when you get to be my age, I'm not alone. A lot of us, 70 plus years people, have sort of come face to face with our mortality. And so that's a really life changing experience. Fortunately, it wasn't a death sentence.
Mhm.
Fortunately, what I had was treatable. And I'm past that. I've had a couple of relapses, but I'm fine
Mhm.
from that standpoint. But coming face to face with the fact that you might be dead in a couple of months is opens your eyes, and so that's something I think about death, and I started thinking about death then. And one of the things that I realized when I was face to face with death, although it frightened me, it didn't frighten me that much. It was like, oh, shoot, what a bummer kind of thing,
Mhm.
and it was like, okay, so that's just what happens. People die, and I'm going to be one of them. So, so there was that. A few years before that, I think I sent you some images. I don't know if you want to show them, but I got a grant to go to the National Archives, and I looked at photographs that were taken during different wars that the United States was in, from Vietnam, even the Civil War, Vietnam, Korea War, World
Mhm.
War II. And in those were a lot of fatalities, a lot of images of dead people. And I ended up doing a lot of work, or a series of works that I called Life After Death. And those were about people, a lot of whom were unnamed, and even the ones that were named, most of them weren't, but even the ones that were named were really, as far as I was concerned, they were no one I knew. And I thought, there's something really interesting about these people that died, and they died for a cause. Was their death meaningless, or did it have a purpose? And so I thought it might be interesting to play with that idea of the fact that even these anonymous people, these people I have no idea who they were or nothing about their life, they didn't live for no reason. They lived for a reason. And so I tried to kind of construct a fiction about them, going back to storytelling. And
Mhm.
so I wrote stories that ended up being part of the piece. There was a handwritten text, which was a story, a fictionalized account that I wrote about this person, and which kind of gave them a history, a sense of life, and it was a way of resurrecting them. So that was another piece where I dealt with this idea of death. And then out here in the woods, my dogs are going to come home with things like a deer leg, or a dead possum, or various things. And so I see death all the time, and it's just part of the cycle. It's just part of things. And there's one piece that I sent you is called Standing Dead Tree. And it's this it's gone now, but it was on the highway as you drove into town. It was this white pine tree that was dead and had been dead for, I don't know, many years. So it didn't have any leaves or anything. And it's a really interesting kind of skeletal structure, because the limbs come out in a symmetrical way. They all come out in the same place, and they go up and they come out again. It's really cool. And I love that image. And I started thinking about the concept of a standing dead tree. I thought of the idea of, you go out in the woods and maybe one out of every 50 trees is dead and it's standing. And I started thinking about, what if I'm this standing dead tree? What if I'm this tree, and I look around and I see all these young trees that are healthy, and I'd say to myself, am I dead? And to me, that seemed really interesting. And that, you think that thing at 70 years, you look at the young artists doing great stuff and you think, am I dead? Is it all over? So I don't get, you're not going to get a real clear answer from me, but this idea of life and the cycle of life and death as a part of life, all of that is sort of in my mind and very fascinating to me. And I hate it when people I love die.
Sure.
It's horrible. But at the same time, death is part of life.
Sure. That was clear as a bell. Can you talk a little bit about the process of your current work? You talked about how you mentioned briefly in an email last week or so that you're approaching lithography in a way that you never have before. And is there perhaps a connection between this new approach and the content of the work? Because it seems like, the recent work that you sent me is really, precisely drawn, crayon drawing in a way that, some of the work leading up to your retirement was more multimedia and more calligraphic and looser.
Yeah. Well, okay, thanks for asking. That's a good question, because we're talking about what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So right at the end of my years at Arizona, I wasn't quite aware of it, but I was in a slump. I wasn't really loving what I was doing. I was working real hard, and I knew I was not that satisfied. And we moved out here, and there was a big change, and I just kind of didn't know what I was all about, and didn't know what I wanted to do as an artist. And so I decided, all right, I'm just going to just take stock of, what do I care about? What inspires me? What I like about my life and about what I'm experiencing. And I love nature. I always have. I've always loved to hike through nature. I've always loved to camp and fish and all that stuff. And so I've got this wooded area. I walked the dogs through the woods, and one morning we were walking back when we first moved here, and we walked out on the lake, and it was misty, and there were a couple of these Canadian geese up there, and it was just magical, and it was so spiritual. It was so amazing. And I thought, my goodness, if I could capture that, if I could somehow transfer that feeling that I just experienced to a viewer, that would be real art. That would be really great. So I started trying to do that. And then I got to say, I did an image of those geese, and it sucked. But I got better at it. And another thing I began to realize is when I was a high school student, I learned that if I spend enough time, I could draw pretty well. But I didn't really like doing that very much. And I didn't spend, none of my career did I really try to draw referentially or meticulously. And for some reason, at my age now, that gives me a whole lot of satisfaction. So I'll sit down on a stone and I'll draw and I'll draw and I'll spend a lot of time on these images. And I'll go deeper and deeper and deeper into the detail. And I love that. It's like the deeper you get, the more you learn, the more you discover. It's like the universe opens as you go deeper and deeper into the detail. And so this world reveals itself to me. And you can do that in lithography, and you can do that with crayon drawing. So I'm crayon drawing on stones, and I'm getting as deep into detail as I can. So my process is a matter of, I take photographs. I take zillions of photographs, and I'll go through the photographs and I'll see something that might be a good image. And sometimes I'll work with the photograph as it is. Well, usually I'll kind of, pop out the contrast or play with it in Photoshop a little bit to experiment with what I can do with it. But a lot of times I'll kind of, montage stuff together and do it that way. And then when I get in there and draw it, I look at the photograph and draw it. But in a way, it's like the photorealist copying a photograph, but it's not really, because I'm bringing a lot more to the photograph than what's already there. For one thing, I don't make high quality printouts of these images. My inkjet printer is not that great. And so there's a lot left to the imagination, and I let my imagination kind of, like, I can't quite see what's happening there, so I have to let my imagination figure it out. And that's where it gets really fun and really exciting.
Yeah.
So about the work, right now I'm drawing things that are just really inspiring, that are just matter to me. And I'm also getting into the drawing in a way that I never ever did before. And I have to say, like, when I drew those geese, I thought to myself, if one of my students did this, I would tell them, you're wasting your time. This is just crap. Don't do this. This has nothing to do with contemporary art. This is not art. But that was interesting to me, because that's another thing that I learned after leaving academia, is I don't have to care about practicing what I preach as a teacher. Like, I'm preaching contemporary art. I don't have to care about being a contemporary artist now. All I have to care about is pleasing myself, which is really cool. And now, as I do the work, and the further I get with the work, it's like, oh, this is not uncontemporary. This is actually, it works. It goes with what's going on in the art world. But that was not my intent. I was not trying to do what the art world expected. In fact, I was only doing what I was trying to do. And that's the first time in my life, it took a long time, but the first time in my life to really not think about trying to do what's expected in the art world. So
maybe there's something to be said for, making stuff for 50 years. Somehow you are inherently still sort of tapped into what people are going to respond to. It's ingrained now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still, telling my stories, and the stories, they get kind of wacky and convoluted, and they're entertaining to me.
Again, part of the purpose of this feature is to keep members of the printmaking community connected with SGCI throughout their careers. Do you have anything you'd like to share about your experience with the organization, or any more advice for younger artists? Do you have any hopes and dreams, ambitions for what you'd like to see us as an organization do next? What's your part? Do you have any parting shots for us, basically?
Well, SGC is a great organization, and I haven't been able to go every year, but I try to go regularly. And the talks are always wonderful. The demonstrations were always frustrating to me because I never got there early, which meant I really couldn't see what was going on. So if there was a way to, and you may do this, but if you could videotape the demonstrations so that people could see them later, that would be really great.
Yeah.
But I do like the talks, and I think the most valuable part of SGC is just getting together with people and meeting new people, and the vendor fair was always good, and the portfolio open portfolios were just phenomenal, exhausting, but
Yeah.
just amazing. I love that. I mean, it's so great. So what advice do I hear some advice I have for younger artists. SGC is expensive, and the best thing you can do is try to figure out a way to get someone to pay for your way. A lot of schools have grants for faculty, but also grants for students. And any teachers that watch this, and I actually don't need to recommend this because teachers already do this,
Hmm.
but teachers can get together and write a grant for their students. There's a lot of that happens, and that's how a lot of students are able to go. But if you can go as a student or as a young artist, it's a good way to get your work seen. It's a good way to meet people. And it's a real good way to see what's going on. It's just really great. So it's a great organization. And if it was less expensive, or if there were ways, better, more affordable ways for people to be able to go, that would be very nice.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a great organization, and
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that that's one area. If there's any way to make it more accessible to younger artists, that would be good.
Yep. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Andy?
Well, would you edit out all the stupid things I say?
Well, I think what you think are stupid, what I think are stupid might be a little bit different. I think this went remarkably well, especially for our first try. And I learned a lot in this conversation. I'm sure other people will take a lot from it as well. But for sure, when I do the sort of pared down version for the in print on the website, I'll take just the finest morsels. So you sound as concise and clear as concise as possible. How about that?
Great. Thank you, Blake. This has been a pleasure.
Well,
My best of luck to you, and thank you for doing this. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your amazing view. I'm inspired just looking behind your head.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I wanted to make sure that people could look at that, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Not this.
Well, again, thanks so much for your time. Give our best to Catherine, and we hope to see you both at the conference real soon.
Okie doke.
All right. Take
Bye.
care.